Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Empowered Hour here at LA Live Action. And today I am talking about a really important topic when it comes to BIPOC communities. Definitely in the self-defense community, this has been an ongoing conversation. It's very important. We have for years and years, we've been putting together best practices and looking at different structures. And part of that is also encompassing and making sure that we're honoring people for their cultural background, their origin, sexual orientation, and a wide range of things. And so I brought together this panel today to actually have some discussions on best practices here. For this particular topic. So I just wanted to go around and say hello to everybody and also have them introduce themselves because they have Liz, I can't even, like I would need the printout of all of your qualifications in order to go down it. I would, but I think you can do it better. So we'll just start out with Liz and then we'll go around the square.
Cool. Thanks, Tasha, for inviting me and for, I think, having this discussion. And thank you for making such an amazing group because as we all know, Des and Mags and you are some of my favorite freaking people, not just in this industry, but in the planet. So there's that to begin with. So my name is Liz Fitzgerald. I am President and Executive Director of Assert Empowerment Self-Defense, which is a nonprofit that focuses on empowerment self-defense for underserved communities, really for everyone, but our focus is underserved communities. Aside from that, I run a martial arts school and in doing that, or rather I own a martial arts school. I'm apparently just a figurehead. My students tell me what I'm doing. Where we teach Taekwondo, Aikido, Hapkido, Filipino Kali, Jeet Kune Do. We're now adding Muay Thai and a series of other arts. So I've been doing this now for, gosh, like 16 years or something like that. So that's me in a nutshell. Oh, I'm also Latina. I was born in Venezuela, but raised in the US, so raised bicultural. And so, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Awesome. And Des?
My name is Des Schallenberg, and I live in Colorado. I am a padded instructor with Impact Personal Safety of Colorado. So that means I'm the one in the big helmet and the big pads that the students get to wail on. And I also work with ESD Global. And my job right now is as the BIPOC liaison for the curriculum team. And so the project that I'm working on right now for the rest of this year is decolonizing the ESD Global curriculum. So what that is for level 1 teacher training. I am bringing in more more diversity and just different voices, different experiences, and so that's what I do. And then I guess in my spare time, I just discovered jujitsu. Which is so heckin' fun. So that's kind of just like always on my mind. But one of these days I'm going to be like Liz and like learn all these different things and teach all these different things. But for now, I'm just getting our curriculum to be more inclusive.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. It's awesome that you're doing jujitsu.
It's cool. So fun.
And Magdalena.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again, Tasha, for having me. Magdalena Diaz, pronouns ella, she, her, hers. I identify as a brown, formerly undocumented woman. So I am originally from Mexico, but I have lived in the United States since I was 6 years old. And professionally, I've worked with survivors of interpersonal violence for about 10 years. I worked out in the community, working in nonprofits, and then now I work in education system, working to address and respond to any allegations of sexual misconduct or gender-based violence. I am also certified as a restorative justice facilitator, trauma-informed care facilitator as well, in mental health recovery. And then I am an ESD level 1 instructor. I've been facilitating empowerment self-defense courses for over, I think it's gonna be 2 years already. I know what 2020, like, I'm like, wait, what is time, right? That whole year is like missing. So I think it's gonna be 2 years that I've been
August.
conducting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. At the moment, one of the projects I'm working on that I'm very passionate about is I'm also very interested in decolonizing not just ESD or self-defense, but all areas of services when we're talking about survivors of interpersonal violence. And I'm co-facilitating an 8-week course in Spanish for the Latin American cohort, ESD cohort, on trauma-informed care practices and also decolonizing the work that we do.
All of you, thank you so much for being here. And for those of you who are watching, their bios will be on here for the YouTube channel and the different areas that we're posting. So definitely check those out if you'd like more information on each of their individual work. I highly recommend going there, following them, not stalking them because not okay. Follows, likes, those things. But yeah, so I'm really grateful for all of you coming here. Oh, and then as far as my background goes, I am a Nez Perce Native American, Caucasian, Asian. I'm also an adopted member of the Stolo Nation. So it was really important for me growing up to be able to learn more about different cultures and also honor people where they're at. I think it's just because, growing up, when you look different, you're definitely treated differently. And I've noticed as we're going along and going through the curriculum and the trainings that I've been through, I definitely have questions that come up that kind of make people pause, like, oh, I've never had something like that happen to me. Happens to me a lot. Or, there's other people who have experienced different things like microaggressions daily. And so I just wanted to kick off and actually step into this and ask some different tough questions for the group. First off, when it comes to the curriculum and your area of focus, what do you think is something that instructors need to know when it comes to working with populations that are not their own? Liz, I saw you. Me. I want to answer this.
Particularly, I want to answer or offer one piece of an answer because it happens to be a huge pet peeve of mine. Not just as a Latina coming into this country as a kid and, growing up bicultural on two shores, etc. But also once I took up the mission of teaching empowerment self-defense, being taught by people who thought they had all the answers, like that is literally the one thing that is like the biggest barrier I find with empowerment self-defense instruction as it's taught right now, is that it's mostly people being sent out to give this information into summer communities that they're perfectly comfortable with, summer communities that they have like no idea what's going on in that community. I think in the last podcast that we did together, I gave an example, a personal example for myself. I'm Venezuelan. I grew up on both shores. I would not in a million years venture a guess and throw myself into a Venezuelan refugee camp right now, or even among like wealthy Venezuelans still living in Venezuela. I wouldn't know what their experience is. I am not the right person to come in there with all of the answers, no matter how many years of empowerment self-defense I've got. It needs to be someone from that community. If you've got no other option and you have to go in there and you are an instructor and that is not well versed in the community that you're going into, give yourself time to find out who they are and what things they're facing. And even more important than that, be adaptable. You don't have the answers. You don't know their experience, and your way may not be the best way. So be adaptable. Okay, those are my 2 cents.
That was fantastic. Yeah, that covered a lot. I would agree that yeah, you need to know who you're teaching. And if you don't know, it's okay to not know, but it's not okay to continue not knowing. So so if someone is like, well, what would I do if this? Don't flub it. Don't make it up. Just say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And then if you need to follow up with those people, do that. Or the next class of a series, readdress it. I see a lot of times things will just go to the parking lot and then just die there. And so, we're never really fully heard. I also, one of the things that really bothers me as a large Black woman is the assumption that I'm going to be really strong or really powerful. So one of the things that I get, like one of the microaggressions that I notice is like if there's a pad being held up, they, before they've ever seen me hit, will tell me, I know you can hit this hard, or I know you can yell, or I so and so. But they don't know my trauma. They don't know my trauma around hitting or yelling or standing up for myself. And I think that that we need to give everybody just a blank slate and not assume that they are super strong because they're big, or loud because they're Black, or spicy because they're Latina, which is a microaggression that I was told happened to my Latina friends in a training that they did, and it still floors me. So I think that instructors need to keep their assumptions to themselves and let every student surprise them.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Meg?
Yeah, I think we can all agree, and similarly that, right, it's not about us. I think that's really important for me as an instructor. It's not about me. I think it's also to remember this, kind of to what Liz and Des were saying, like when the people you're teaching don't respond the way that you expected it, it's not about you. It's never about you. And you need to, remove yourself from that and just remember that you're there as a tool, that you're not there to teach or lead people. For me, what's really important too, and it kind of goes connected to this idea of decolonizing, is that these people already have the tools, right? I also always have to remind myself, like, I'm not going to teach new tools. Folks already have their tools. Obviously these people are resilient. We are existing, right? Like, we've survived. And if that's not a prime example that people already have the tools to defend themselves, I don't know what else is, right? So really remembering that, and I always try to be mindful of that. I think a lot of times, because of colonization and oppression, the tools that our communities have been told that they're bad, and we kind of suppress that. And for me, empowerment self-defense is really about going back into these communities and supporting and empowering people to reconnect with those tools, because they already exist within them. And I think the last thing, because when we think of creating brave spaces, we think of like people from outside, right? And if you are a person from an oppressed community, you think, well, my oppression is similar to yours, right? Or I've also been marginalized, so I know what the struggle is like. We don't. As a brown woman in the United States, I can never compare my experience to a Black woman or a Black man. So I think for me, it's also always about centering the needs of the most oppressed. And we always start from there. something's only accessible if the most oppressed have access to it. And so I always have to remind myself that too, because again, as a woman of color, it's easy for me to name all the oppressions that I've experienced. It's much harder to acknowledge the privilege that I hold. And when we block ourselves from looking at our privilege, that's when we can also even cause harm within our own communities or the communities that we're trying to help. So it doesn't just, being a person of color or being a marginalized person doesn't, mean that you're not going to cause harm or that you are completely prepared to provide, the support. It's really remembering your privilege. And accessibility to me means that we center the people that are most oppressed. And if they can access and if they feel safe, then we're doing a good job. But if they don't feel welcome, they don't feel safe, then I don't care how culturally diverse or how equitable your program is, it is not.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate all of your points, because I think that they definitely are very valid, and people need to be paying attention to these kind of conversations. I also wanted to move into just the danger of generalizations. I think that this is something that is far too common. I had conversations with people about, like, what are you doing when it comes to the Native American community? It's like, well, we have one Native American person. And I'm like, wow, how many tribes are there in the United States? There are so many. And my experience as, a mixed Native person is not going to be the same experience as someone who's on a reservation. I have been asked to go teach, and for me, I've worked with different communities, but I've been like, if there is someone who is already in your community doing this work, then please go see them. Like, they're going to have the knowledge, they're going to have the skills, and they're going to have the understanding of what it's like living in that community. I do not have that. I grew up in Gig Harbor, which is like a boating town in an artsy fartsy town. So I'm not going to have that same experience. But I did want to just hear from all of you different generalizations that you seem to find common within, different instruction that you've witnessed, and also different ways to navigate that for instructors so that they can be more mindful in the future.
So one of the things that I think we need to stay mindful of as instructors are that we all have different sources for safety, right? So back when I first learned impact, our sign or our cue that we had reached safety was call 911. And now they've changed that to go get help, and they've acknowledged that 911 is not help for everybody. So I really appreciate that differentiation, and I think that we still need to do even more to figure out what safety is, because again, how these people, anybody taking our class has kept themselves alive is self-defense. It is correct. So if for you safety is going to write about it in a diary, then we have to honor that and not push them to do something outside of their comfort zone or outside of what is socially acceptable in their own life.
Yeah, I agree, Des. I know when I first was being trained, and so because I had that first person experience, I was able to say, okay, if this is how I feel, I can only imagine how the folks that I'm gonna be out, facilitating for are gonna feel. But I remember when I was being trained, when they're explaining the get help, it was always like, yell for help or scream. And it was we're in the midst of, all these murders happening in the United States towards people of color, specifically Black men and Black women. And when I was doing my training, actually, it was during the shooting that happened in Texas that was towards Latinx folks. So in my head, I'm like, okay, like screaming for help, depending on what you look like, I don't know if that's the safest thing to do, right? And we've also, we just recently saw a Black young girl be murdered, and, like she called for help. So being very aware. And I remember immediately shutting down because of what was happening in the United States in the context of my own experience as a
Mhm.
person of color, but everything else that I witnessed. So if I shut down, I could only imagine if we came in and right away said like, this is what helps look like, right? I specifically can also speak because I work with survivors of interpersonal violence, um, with this whole concept of like when you are working with survivors of like domestic violence and the old school model of advocacy, which was like we save people, right? We're going in there to save them and they have to leave the relationship because the only way out is like leaving, you know, going to jail or in a casket, right? And that was the only options. And the realization that a lot of folks cannot leave abusive relationships, and we don't live in a perfect world, in a just world. Yeah, you know, everyone would be able to leave, um, but if we're teaching a self-defense class for a domestic violence survivor who's still in a relationship, if we only teaching the physical components or how to leave, we're not really helping, right? Because that could create more violence for them. And so it's really being mindful of that, like not everyone can leave, not everyone can call the police. Being very mindful of that, and what is it that's safe, what is redefining safety, right? And I think that's the first question to ask, like, what does safety look like for you? And then we can work from there. Again, sometimes we're not going to get the answers that we want. Sometimes it's like minimizing the type of abuse. Again, when you work in this field, we want to hear eradicate, right? But that's not realistic for some people. So it's like, okay, if we can minimize it, that's safety. And they're defining safety, not me.
That's huge.
I think Des and Magdalena really explained it so well that there's nothing I can add. But I would like to stress that that's where being adaptable as an instructor it becomes so important. We see too many instructors across the board, just even teachers of elementary school, that are so dead set in that my way is the highway, that they actually alienate their students and do more harm than good. A couple of years back, we ended up with a situation at an instructor training that I attended, where the person delivering the instruction had that very same mindset of, this is the way I've been doing it for this many years, and this is the way that it's going to go, and it's the only answer. And there were women there that worked with refugees constantly, and we're like, we can't have our refugees put their hands up like this, because the guards are going to think that that's an aggressive move. All that's going to get them is either thrown into, you know, whatever prison area they've got, or beaten up, or worse. There's got to be some other way. Nope, the only way is with your hands like this. You know what? That's 100% not across the board. Western societies accept this as leave me alone. Asian societies don't. That's just one example, right? So adaptability, constantly maintaining your level of education and continuing education, and exposure to new cultures. You know, it's not enough to know how to teach this material, and it's not enough to go out into your, you know, into your different communities and spread it. It's important to know what other cultures are experiencing, not just in your country, but across the board. You know, the things that are going right now between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Who here feels comfortable going in to teach an ESD class to either group here in the United States right now? Of course we don't. We don't understand the experience. We don't have that experience, right? And we have to be able to recognize that, and we have to be able to adapt and make the changes that we need in order to better address that kind of situation.
Yeah, so you're actually bringing up, this ties into the next question that I had, because I think so many times we as instructors, there are best practices and we're trying to do our best, but you know, in that we had to have a lot of learning experiences to get to that point. And I know that even in just the past 2 years after starting the ESD journey, I have had loads of learning experiences. I have contacted Liz. I'm like, help me. I don't know what to say. You know, like I will say for myself, I had a group of people who were for predominantly blind, and they wanted a self-defense workshop, and I was like, you know, sure you want me? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I put a blindfold on. I tried walking around for a day. I'm like,
That's awesome.
what would this be? What are certain concerns that I'd have? Like, I stubbed my toe so many times. I can't tell you. It's like, God damn it. Environmental awareness, like what do I do? You know, and then I was like, okay, I feel prepared, I feel good. And I walked in and they had rows set up of tables. It wasn't like a clear space. It was like, this is all wrong, folks. This is all wrong. We have to do this over. We can't do this right now. Okay. But then I realized, oh, I'm going to have to come very, very close for a lot of people to be able to see. I'm going to have to be very specific with what I'm saying and very, you know, animated with how I'm saying it. And then also just be very honest. Like, if you don't know what I'm saying or you don't understand what I'm talking about, please raise your hand, because I don't know that you don't know. And once I know that you don't know, I will do my best to try and
that's awesome.
how I can describe it so that you understand what I'm saying. But that was such a huge learning experience. And I also had an experience where I was working with an LGBTQ group. And it was really interesting because, you know, for them, they wanted me to address them by, you know, like their pronouns, not their names. And someone specifically just wanted to be identified as D. And I was trying for the whole time, I was like, what is D? And I was like, why didn't I just ask? Just asked. And that would be great. But for 2 hours, you know, in my head, I'm like, remember to call this person D. And I screwed up so many times. And I thought, wow, this is such a good learning experience for me. They really appreciated the workshop and the training, but I felt like I could have done better. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, what was that learning experience for you, of this aha moment of like, I feel like I could have done better, and I want people to understand, you know, this is this story, so that they can have that aha moment, hopefully, if they're watching, where they're like, okay, yeah, I need to be able to do better, and I need to set the bar higher, because they deserve that.
Yeah. Yeah. I really needed to do better story still makes me really sad, because I do feel like I failed this student, and I never got to make it right. But I was a student instructor in a teen class. It was like teen women, and there was a trans woman who was newly out as trans. And so I think she was still working her way into what that meant, you know. And we were doing boundary setting, like with a hostile person. And so one of the things that we encourage them to do is use their voice, right? Get loud. And so I was agitating, like in my role as the suit, as my attacker, I was really agitating this woman, and she wasn't getting loud. All I wanted was a nice, loud, leave me alone, or no, and I wasn't getting it. And then later, like at the end of, she actually ended up leaving class early, after I don't know what, but we found out later that with her specifically, and I don't know if this is across the board, but with her specifically, she would speak very quietly because that's how she could have her voice in that high pitch. But if she were to yell, her voice would get deep. And so I was never going to get that yell out of her. And I badgered her, like I, as my suit, badgered her for it. And it makes me still kind of sick, because I'm like, that was Like that's as abusive, I think, as I've ever gotten as a suit. And it was unintentional. And now I just know that I have to ask questions ahead of time. I have to. And we don't have to pretend. I think what we did was we tried to pretend that she was not trans. And that's ridiculous. She knows who she is. We all know who she is. And somebody should have had the conversation beforehand. What are some concerns you have about class? What are some things that really scare you, that get you upset, and how can we help? And it would have made all the difference, I think, in her experience. So that's just one that we just lost. And yeah, I don't want that to ever happen again. So, now I think that we as instructors need to just ask some questions with like we can't just go in blind. Like if we can all avoid it, let's talk to the person that we're scheduling with and ask a little bit about what's the population of this group and what are some specific considerations, what are some things that they're afraid of, and how can we help? Because if I'm going to go teach a group of young Black women, that's going to be way different than if I'm going to go teach a group of felons, right? They have different considerations, and and you know, surprise, we're not just afraid of sexual assault scenarios. But when you look at the curriculum, most of the scenarios are sexual assault. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, that's still scary, but racial abuse is way scarier, and I don't have the tools to work through that in regular curriculum. So we need to start learning who we're teaching and what they need. And yeah, anyway, long story short, long story even longer, that was my lost one, and now I know better.
Yeah, I think to what Des is saying, right? I think a lot of times, even being women of color, identifying as women of color, or even if you're not, right? It's the idea of like, oh, I'm gonna go to this course, I'm gonna listen to this podcast, I'm gonna listen to this recording, and now I am trauma informed or I'm culturally competent. That's not how it works, right? I always tell people like it is not it's not the end destination. Like being trauma informed, being culturally competent, it's like an ongoing journey forever. Like you never, it's not a check the box, right? Because when we're talking about any type of trauma, even asking those questions, right, it's really about learning how to be in tune with these things, which again, we're human and we're gonna make mistakes and we're gonna be flawed and sometimes we're gonna miss it, right? But it's like ongoing learning. Because even when people, like when we talk about interpersonal violence or even racial violence, people might have worked through it and they're like, I think I'm in a good space. But as we all know, when it comes to trauma, like you can be activated at any point, even if you think you're in a good place where you feel safe.
Mhm.
So just because someone tells you like, I've worked through this, I'm good, it doesn't mean that they won't be activated in your class, right? And so it's like an ongoing thing that you always have to be constantly aware, which is very exhausting because not only are you teaching the curriculum, but you also have to be in tune with everything that's happening. And again, as humans, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to miss some of these cues, but it's really about acknowledging it. I think that's the one thing when we talk about, I believe in harm reduction, and I believe that people can change, right, if given the right tools. So we have to practice that. So if I harm someone, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I harmed them, and want to push it down. It's like, just acknowledge it and apologize, and that person can choose how they receive that, but you've at least acknowledged the harm that you created. I think we cause more harm when we try to dismiss it or ignore it.
Mm.
So it's like an ongoing thing, and that's why it's so important for people not just think that they can listen to a workshop or take a class, that this is like, you forever are invested in this, and you always have to be learning and evolving when it comes to working with folks that have experienced trauma.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely the curriculum should be a living document. And it's never as simple as I'm going to print out these forms and teach to them. And I will know that I've done my job. no, like after you teach it, you got to go through and modify it again and do some pre-work.
So not to keep harping on the adaptability, but that's exactly what I'm talking about, you know, and it's key, no matter whether it's because you're teaching empowerment self-defense or you're just out in the world being a person, you know, being a member of a community, you know, however big that community is, whether you see it as global or you see it as it's the people in this building and the rest of the rest of the world can burn. It doesn't matter. Any exchanges you're going to have with a group of people, you need to remain adaptable. My personal moment of, oh, good God, that's right, I don't have all the answers. Remain open. Years ago, when we first started teaching, we, you know, got all these different certifications. We collected all the certifications that we could because we wanted to come from a place of, you know, making it as informed as informed a set of choices as we could. And among them, we took several seminars and stuff like that on how to teach trauma informed, which at the time it wasn't even called trauma informed. It was just, you know, how to, you know, victim first response, or, you know, how to deal with previously victimized groups, et cetera. It did not even have like its own, you know, specific term for it. So we took an ongoing job at an inpatient eating disorder clinic, which our program, we had really great success there. And it was one of our most favorite, still to this day, it is one of our favorite experiences in teaching empowerment self-defense that we have ever had, was teaching at this clinic. But right away, within the first couple of months of teaching, and it was an every week class, you know, we were seeing many of the same women for weeks on end, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We had a moment where one of the women we had been working with for at least a month at that point, it was during a scenario, you know, like a role-playing thing that we were training that we were doing. And she just all of a sudden clammed up. She had apparently had like a really very triggering week, the whole week, and everything just kind of came to a head at that moment. So the first thing we thought, well, okay, we need to like help this person get grounded again and do the stuff. So Kat, my partner, who's male, took a step back, kind of disappeared off into the background, and I approached her in ways that I had over the course of that month before. And then I tried to take her through a deep breathing exercise to help her kind of just find her center again. And I didn't understand it then, but the deep breathing exercise and making references to belly breath and breathe deep and breathe like a baby and let your body expand immediately just made everything worse. Immediately made everything worse because, oh my gosh, I was teaching at an eating disorder clinic. How did those things not immediately click? It was the first time I was going to use that particularly grounding exercise. How did I not have that wherewithal to say, maybe using this kind of language in this particular situation is going to be the wrong choice? Anyway, in any case, it made the situation much worse. We had to call in one of the therapists to go ahead and take her out and, you know, work through some of the stuff. We were absolutely horrified. We spent the entire week doing everything humanly possible to undo the damage. The eating disorder was fantastically okay with it, and they dealt with it amazingly. But, you know, after that, I was actually really, really gun shy for like the next few months, until finally, just kind of in passing, checking in with the administration, they were like, no, absolutely, you know, what happened with that particular incident happens to us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though we're professionals and this is our focus and this is what we do day in and day out, 24/7 for months on end with these women, we still don't know what's going to trigger them. We're unraveling this giant ball of yarn trying to hopefully, get to the core of it so that we can come to some resolution and help the person through. But it's a dirty process. And the one thing that we've learned is stay adaptable. We all, pardon me, fuck up. We do.
Yep.
We all misspeak. We all have a moment where in our attempt to care, say something that could have maybe been said better. And like, the moment that it's falling out of your mouth, you're like, oh, for God's sake, what was I thinking? Because we're human. So we also have to, when I say adaptable, it's adaptable to the people around you, to the people that you're addressing, to the situation that you're in, to the community that you're trying to communicate, and adaptable with yourself, forgiving with yourself. Give yourself some latitude. You know what I mean? Don't use this as an excuse to not continue to improve what you know and the practice that you do, but also understand that the more we understand, the more, studies are done, the more information is available, the better information that we have to make better choices and to then, pass this information on in a safer way. But even the experts don't have all the answers yet. And they're the first ones to tell you, we don't know. We don't have the answers. So if they're saying it, it's got to be okay for us to say, you know what? I am sorry. That is not what I meant to say. Certainly not the way I meant to say it. Let me come back to you because I don't really have a good answer for you. Or do we need to take a moment? Is there anything that you need to get off your chest? But, let's resolve this, whatever. How can I best support you? We also have to have that flexibility and that adaptability for ourselves. Otherwise, none of us get any better.
Yeah, and I think to Liz, what you were saying, like language matters. Language is so important, and I think that's one of the things that we forget. We talk about aggressive, right? And what is perceived as aggressive. I mean, how am I allowed to display aggressiveness looks very different for other populations. So being very mindful of the language that we utilize when we're talking to people or in facilitating a class. I think, I'm a firm believer of this, like violence is first created through language, right? Who has access to things, who doesn't, who has access to even defend themselves. It's all based on language, right? The spaces we create through language can be either a hostile or an open environment. And I think sometimes we forget that. And it's not just about using the right terminology, right? It's actually meaning things, right? I think we've all do this work because we care and we want to make a difference, but we've also can acknowledge that we have caused harm. Either it wasn't because we wanted to, but we do. And that's why I think it's also going back to, like, it's not about me, right? Like, I need to leave that outside, because when we make it about ourselves, that's when it's really hard to acknowledge our mistakes or the harm that we create.
So true. And and it is really interesting just being on this journey where you're constantly trying to be very mindful and have a lot of cultural acknowledgement of other people's cultures and backgrounds. One of the greatest lessons that I learned in all of these cultural competency trainings that I've done is that you cannot be fully culturally competent in somebody else's culture. You just can't. And I think that if people could actually grasp that, because I think that so many people are trying to have an answer. Like, oh, I went through a cultural competency training, I'm good now. Like, oh, I went through, 3 of these cultural competency trainings, and now I can go and teach in like this separate community. And so I think that there are so many dangers with that. I have a girlfriend. She and I have had a joint birthday party every year except for last year because of the pandemic. And she is 6 foot. Her afro makes her about 6'4", 6'2". It's just beautiful and gorgeous, but she gets so much attention. And she has a husband who played, who looks like a linebacker. And I call him and his sons like gentle giants. But all of them have had experiences with police, and they've been, I remember the first time she told me that her 16-year-old, he was 16 at the time, now he's not, but her 16-year-old son who had Asperger's was riding his bicycle home from school and got pulled over by the police because they didn't think that he should be in that neighborhood.
Ugh.
And he lived there. And so it's, you know, for me, I just remember my first initial thoughts, and they stick with me, of like, oh, why would that happen? You know, and then it's just like, hello. And I have been on just such this very interesting journey when it comes to being very mindful, having a better understanding, knowing that I can never know and or walk in other people's shoes when it comes to this kind of work, but trying as much as I can. And I did want to talk about that when it comes to just protester safety. Liz, I know that you are so involved when it comes to protester safety. And I know that right now, this is a huge issue for our country, so many countries, but our country specifically, it's something that that needs to be addressed. And I know that even, you know, like a cringe story for me that I shared with Liz was like, I had a one-off empowerment self-defense training, and it was like, okay, it's a group of people that wanted to get together for that, but then they also mentioned that they were protesters, and I was like, okay, I want to make sure that I have everything right. So I like sends a message to Liz. I'm like, I want to make sure, can I like show you my curriculum? You know, ask you questions, all of this stuff, and Liz is like, I can be there if you want. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want her to think that I can't do it. Like, and then I went through, you know, I went through this whole process, and I realized like they could probably use more training. I just don't know if I'm like the one to do that. And so I was like recommending, I recommended Liz. I was like, Liz would be great. She's amazing. And then they heard like that she had worked with police officers, and the energy in that space went down. It wasn't, you know, like the assumptions that were made. I didn't preface things, I guess, in a way too. So that was also for me, I'm like, but I just had this really difficult moment because for one woman in particular, she was African American, and you know, for her asking me, what do I do if somebody's pointing a gun at my face, my answer to run was not the right answer. And I was like, I don't have a better answer. I'm not going to show you the moves that I've been taught at my martial arts school, where you have to be an expert in 5 different weapons. And I've spent years and years doing these trainings on how to get out of these situations, because if somebody put a gun in my face, I would still probably want to do the same thing. I'd probably want to run. You know, I don't want to be the hero and be a badass and try and do all of these things when my life is on the line. And I don't want to give that advice to somebody else, because there's a huge danger in that. Like I go to these trainings with these men who are like, oh yeah, with the knife fight, you just do this and this and this. And I'm like, you have 46 years of experience, and you are teaching these people who look at you and think, oh, if I go out there and I do that, I'm going to survive. I'm like, you've been stabbed before. I think they're worried about that. You know, so I just wanted to touch on that, because it's definitely something that that was definitely a cringe-worthy moment for me, of like, I had wanted to do better for that person, but I just didn't have a better answer than to run, except for like, go and take a firearms training, go so you understand and know what it is, like what to expect, just so that you have more knowledge about it, so that when something does come up, you'll have more of that background. Because, you know, I want them to be able to do what they need to do for themselves, but I also want them to be safe. And in my mind, that was the right one. That was the right thing to say. So anyway.
I do think that when we're talking about police brutality and police violence, I don't even know if we have an answer, like any of us, right? Because the reality is that police violence has been something that is allowed, but as citizens, we're not allowed to defend ourselves. So I just honestly, like, I feel like I would be in the same place as you, where it's like, there's no right answer, right? Because I think we've talked about like de-escalation, right? What, because we know that police brutality and police violence towards Black bodies has existed through, the history of the United States. So that's nothing new right now. We just have cameras where we're seeing this. But when this became, something that as a country we started talking, we said de-escalation, right? Let's de-escalate. Let's teach people how to de-escalate. I mean, I think there was even an app that was created, right, to record and all these things. But we've also seen, and I think it being, again, going back to language, the message that we're sending to the Black community, right? That you have to like be this person that just follows rules because that's the only way to stay safe. And then we also have seen that even when people have, try to de-escalate and haven't done anything wrong, they're still being murdered. So, okay, we can teach de-escalation, but we also know that police brutality goes beyond, it's based on racism. It's based on all these other things that no de-escalation tactic is going to get rid of racism that has been in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we know that running isn't an option either, because we see, right, when people run, and then we see the news people like, if they hadn't ran, if they had just had, there's never a right answer. I think that's a really difficult topic, because at the moment in the state that we live in, police violence has been okayed. They are able to use whatever force they want on any of us. As citizens, we are not allowed to do the same. So there's no right way to de-escalate if a police officer has a gun to your face, right? Unless you're a white male, because anything you do, they can take as you were trying to attack them. So I just going back to, I would be like, you know what? Like, we would have to change the system in order for me to be able to teach a self-defense class on how to, handle a police officer pointing a gun at you, because right now our system is set up for them to be allowed to do that, and no matter what we do, we're not allowed self-defense in this situation.
Mhm.
So my focus in the past is, well, even it's not just in the past. We still seek to train out police specifically because of police brutality. So our focus has been actually police modality reform. The trainings that they're offered are, and I don't know if you've ever looked into it, but the trainings that they're offered, because it's so costly to do it in-house, are usually outside trainers that come into it. And the ones that are the most popular are the ones that are backed by, organizations like the NRA and things like that, which are all, shoot first, bang, bang, bang. We're all gonna be cowboys now. Ooh, whatever, and I'm making light of it because honestly, at this stage, if I don't make light of it, all I do is get angrier and angrier and angrier. So I have to de-escalate myself with a little bit of humor, because it goes nowhere good, right? So, however, in working with police, we've been able to get, or to learn rather, is the tactics that they do use, the things that they do look for, and so the behaviors that they look for, that kind of thing. So while you're 100% right, Magdalena, like if someone was holding a gun to my face, it's going to take, and I'm just like a person that just took like a 1-day protest course, like how to protest safely, I still would not know what to do with someone pointing a gun. With all the experience that we have in teaching firearms defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, someone points a gun, and the truth is that no matter what they're holding in your face or what they're threatening you with, that adrenaline dump is going to be the first thing you have to deal with. And even if you have all of the answers and all the physical tactics and all of the things, you can't guarantee that you're going to have access to them anyway. So, so it does require, particularly when it comes to protesting safely, it requires ongoing training across a variety of different formats. It's not just about the communications aspect, because we definitely want protesters, we want bodies on the street, but we also want to make sure that those protesters are carrying the message appropriately, right? Because let's say that they get stopped in the middle of of a march, the first person that the reporter finds is, I don't know, someone in the middle of the pack. You have to know that you have prepared your protesters well enough that that message that the protest is about isn't going to get derailed.
Yeah.
The reporter's job is to ask you all of the questions. The reporter's job is to shove a camera in your face, ask you all of the questions in the middle of a protest where emotions are already heightened, right? I've got news for you. That's the same exact adrenaline dump that you get when someone holds a firearm to your face. So your body's not going to know, unless you have trained this kind of stuff, your body's still not going to have an answer, even to something as innocuous as being interviewed on TV, if you haven't practiced it first, right? So that's number one. And that's something that we actually learned from training police. We think that they have all of this additional training. Most of the training that they get is outside of police academy, and most of those are private companies. And most of those private companies providing the training have very specific agendas. So the training that they get is based on the agenda of the training that they go to. What we've seen is an increase in these private companies that say that embellish, that enhance, that encourage that us versus them mentality. Increases it, heightens it, right? And we've seen that mostly over the last, not that it wasn't happening before, but we've seen an increase in these trainings over the last 50 years or so. So there's that. The second part is that we also think that they've got all of this training with firearms, this, that, and the other, and they actually don't. Most of them have, depending on the state, depending even on the city, specific recertification requirements that they have to do. Most of them are annually. Some cities might do every 6 months. What does that consist of? You go into a controlled environment and you shoot a target downrange where there is no possibility of anyone potentially getting hurt. Maybe you have to run a block. I don't know. Like, it's like genuinely the most, and I hate to say it like that. I'm not saying it to like belittle, what cities are trying to do or not trying to do. I have my own opinions in that, and I'm leaving those out of this particular conversation, right? But we think that they're far better trained than they are. So if we take all of those things into consideration, they don't actually have the amount of training that we think that they've got. Most of them, when they get sent out on crowd control, have no training on crowd control, or very, very little, because these training agencies that they're going to get additional training from, that's not their focus. Their focus is, you've got the gun, you've got the badge, you're in charge, right? But they don't have any idea of how to control a crowd, and certainly not how to de-escalate one. They don't. They have very, very little training in that. They have either traffic stop, which is still not a guarantee of it being safe, right, or riot gear. But they have it's not a dimmer switch, it's a circuit breaker, right? So in teaching someone to protest safely, we need to take all those things into consideration. We need to understand that the person on the other side that we are, on the other side of that potential arrest is under the same type of stress with very incorrect information backing it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So any protest program that you put together, regardless of if it's for BIPOC, for Anglo-Caucasian, regardless of it's for Latino or for women or for LGBTQAI+, it doesn't matter who it's for, has to come from a place that understands that everyone in that situation would rather not be there.
Yeah.
And that they are all under the same amount of stress. It's just, what information do you have with you that you can utilize to improve the situation.
Mm.
That has to take into account privileges, like if you're a man and you are white and Anglo, and it's specifically white and Anglo, because a white Hispanic is not going to see the same kind of, the same kind of privilege. They still have the white, but they don't have the Anglo. So there's all of these different, pieces, right? We have to identify the privilege that we have. Like Magdalena had said earlier, as a person of color, I don't necessarily understand the privilege that I have in maybe because I grew up here, or maybe because I'm Latina, but I'm white, which still qualifies me as a person of color, right? But I'm white. So, and I have no accent. So most people don't think I'm Latina. And now I'm married, of course, to Kat, whose last name is Fitzgerald. So like all of my Latina-ness, at least in that forward presentation, has disappeared, right? So we have to take into account all of those privileges that we don't recognize necessarily so readily that we have. And then we kind of start from there.
Mm-hmm.
The ability, even something as simple as the ability to stand back with your phone and bear witness and film, even that requires training.
Yeah.
We have a lot of experience at being activists and going through the different media trainings and the different, bearing witness trainings and all of the different things. Even just filming and bearing witness requires training. You shouldn't do it if you're on your own. You should, at the very least, grab someone and say, listen, I'm going to film. Can I count on you to guide me out of harm's way so I can focus on bearing witness? Because you can't multitask that. You can't.
Yeah.
And if on top of it, you're a person of color trying to do all of these other multitasking things, you also have to worry about, well, as soon as I pull out my phone, my camera on my phone, those officers over there that I am trying to document are going to turn on me. It's a very complicated field. If you're going to seek out training on how to protest safely, if you're an organization, whether it be Workers' Dignity here locally, we've done safety trainings for them on how to prepare a safety team to guide and be liaisons for all of the protesters down the line. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know if you know this, but Tennessee, was recently named either in first place or second place by Southern Poverty Law Center as the either first or second top ranking state for number of hate groups. I believe we have a population in the state of like in the 7 to 10 million range, and we're in first or second place for number of freaking hate groups. So you can imagine a group like Workers' Dignity, which is about protecting labor rights for undocumented immigrants and workers, how welcome those protesters are going to be down the middle of the street. Right. So we trained them on preparing their safety team, how to guide them through traffic, how to keep them safe, how to keep an eye on everybody, on working as a team on teams of 2 to 3, where to position, down the line of the protest, how many other organizations are going to be involved? Do they have safety teams? How do you communicate among your team around the entire perimeter? And how do you communicate with the other safety teams if they've got them? That actually, funny enough, the irony here is that that's actually something that we borrow from military training. We repurpose the very things that should be being taught to police, how to de-escalate, how to properly approach, how to not go, like I said, from I'm driving around in my car to, oh my God, riot gear, start throwing gas bombs and, you know, and beating people with batons. We're borrowing that training to hopefully better train protesters, or at least the safety teams charged with keeping them safe, so that they can do things like raise their voice, bear witness, do sit-ins not without the worry that they're not going to be arrested, but at least with the tools that they need in order to do so safely. If I can just give one quick anecdote, Kat worked with Greenpeace as an activist for over 20 years. There was one action where he went over a bridge. They were putting out a big banner across one of the bridges across the Mississippi River because of the pollution and all the illegal dumping that was taking place that was causing cancer in very, very poor communities. He went over the bridge along with, you know, there were several people that went over the bridge in order to roll out this banner for this particular protest piece that they were doing. And the police, you know, were there within minutes. They weren't there in time to stop them from going over the side of the bridge, but they got there soon thereafter. One of the police officers that happened to be up at the top, because they all have walkie-talkies. That's the only way that they can, at that point, you know, be in touch with anybody. So one of the policemen that was at the top of where Kat had tied in to drop over said, well, I've got climbing experience, and if you don't come up here, I'm going to start cutting ropes. Now, I want you to think about how fast the Mississippi River flows, the volume of water. He's already a couple 100 feet up off the surface, and there's ships passing underneath them. That guy, if that guy had started cutting ropes and cut the wrong rope, would have killed him.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I will come up, but no one can touch my ropes. I know what I know. I don't know what certifications you have. I will come up, but I need everyone to step away from my ropes so I can do so safely. It took quite a bit of negotiation, and finally several other police officers to come and get the ramped up cop to step away from the ropes. Kat came up and over, everybody got arrested. When they went to court, that officer was there and was saying, well, you know, I'm a certified industrial climber. And he was not roped in properly. I needed to start taking care of some ropes and blah, 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 which wasn't even what he was saying originally. Like, I'm going to cut ropes, whatever. And so he testified that. And so they brought Kat on to testify for himself. And the defense attorney asked Kat, what certifications do you have? You know, the police officer had already stated his certifications. And so the defense attorney for Kat's group said, okay, well, what certifications do you have? And Kat went down the list of certifications. And he finished by saying, what that essentially means, you know, because it's of course like alphabet soup. It's all sorts of like 95, whatever, you know, that is, unless you're in the know, you don't know. And he said, which all boils down to that my certifications outrank his instructor's certifications. He had no right to approach any of my ropes. Because of that, because of all of that excess training, right? He was not only able to strap himself in a way that he was safe, going over a very dangerous situation, over a bridge, over the Mississippi, but also come up safely, right?
Right.
Training is important. Having the people that know the things as part of your protest team is important. So those are my two.
Wow. There's a lot that goes into that.
There is a lot that goes into it.
That's like way more than I would have than I would have thought.
And it's important, well, you know, it's important that protests be able to be spontaneous. It is. But if you're going to plan a big protest, if you're going to, like, if you know you're doing something ahead of time, my number one piece of advice, and it's like the only one that I will 100% say, do every time, no exceptions. Mm-hmm. Like literally this one has no exceptions kind of thing, is if you know you're planning it ahead of time, you know you're going to have a big group of people, you know that it's a contentious subject, whatever it is, prepare. Get the people that know the things. Make sure that you've got either the ACLU or an attorney group that you think you can't afford. If you're looking at their prices going like, oh my God, how can we possibly afford this? That's the defense team you need. Yeah. Get that one. Hopefully you don't need them, but get that one. You know, have all those numbers available to everyone that shows up. You know, have a safety team in place. Have, you know, and have an exit strategy that you can communicate easily to the people protesting. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of right now is, because the police don't have proper training and because they already have that us versus them mentality, immediately it goes to gas bombs, tear gas, rubber bullets, etc., which is terrifying when you're on the receiving end. Not to mention all the potential harm that comes from it. But at the very, very least, it's terrifying. And so everyone runs in every which direction. When if you had just a little bit of pre-planning ahead of time, some people in place that could communicate, that could guide people, maybe even have some locations that you know are going to support you, that you can run to, that you can help your protesters that are coming to support your cause, right? Give them this information ahead of time. Keep them safe so that they can keep coming back as long as they need to. If the police isn't going to take the steps necessary to make free speech safe, then we have to create those circumstances for ourselves.
Wow. That was awesome. I want to like talk to you more about that. I probably will.
Anytime, I'm always around.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, you know, I and this is also why I was messaging her when I was doing my training. But I think that she's bringing up some really great points, and for those people who are just starting out in ESD, or for those people who are doing trainings, but you've done a specific training a certain way and you're just realizing that you need to be doing more, this conversation isn't to discourage you, and it's not to say that you should stop teaching. It is to say that you should be mindful, you should continue learning. And if you don't have the right information, or you don't think that you're an expert in one particular field, it doesn't mean you have to stop teaching. It does mean that it's good to partner with people who know what they're talking about, know all of the expertise in that area, or go train with that person, learn from them. That was one thing for me after the one conversation where I didn't have the right answer, or the right answer that was wanted at that time, and my referral was to them not like the best referral for them. I went out and got what I thought would be good training, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted. And I've also talked to, Liz about this as well. I think that if you are coming forward and you want to be doing this and you want to share information, And even if you're putting together these groups and panels like this, it's really good to have a diverse group of people from different backgrounds who have different expertise in different areas, so that when you are speaking out to groups, when you are teaching and training, it's not just coming from one narrow lens. And it is okay that you have that lens, but also it's important for you as an instructor to be able to broaden that lens. So in closing, just, I think that, after this, I would hope that people are going to be signing up like, like crazy for all of these different trainings and new certifications and all this other stuff. We can only hope someday to have as many certifications as Kat and Liz. Time. But I would ask in closing, if you have like one hope for that instructor out there who just really wants to do good and serve their community, even if their community is not from the same background, what kind of advice do you have for them? What hopes can you give them? What is just a closing thing that you would like to say?
Ooh. I think I would say keep talking to people, like talk to everybody and listen. Like listen and learn. Yeah, because like we can't just we can't just listen to our echo chamber, right? We need to step outside of that, and the stuff that makes us the least comfortable, we need to really just like, we need to get over it and listen anyway. Like it's not okay to just stay uncomfortable.
I think for me, it's to never feel comfortable and feel like you're done learning. Like this journey is ongoing and it's going to go forward and backwards and loopholes like any other journey, right? And I think that's what's most important to me. Like always know that this is not like the goal is not the end destination, but the whole process. So never get comfortable in what you know and always be open to learning.
I think for me, just in addition to what Des and Magdalena said, which really sums it up brilliantly, is just don't forget to stay flexible and adaptable, and that it's okay to be wrong, so long as you're honest about it.
Yeah, we say it's okay to be wrong. It's not okay to stay wrong.
Yeah.
So you gotta fix it.
Yeah, and I would just also chime in with saying, like if you feel yourself going on the defensive, try and pause and go in with an open mind, because I know that I've backtracked before when people are, like, who are you to be doing this training? Like, well, I've this and this, like I've experienced this. I'm a survivor. And I, in the past, have tried to justify these certain things. And in the end, after mulling it over and coming to the conclusion myself, some of the greatest learnings that I've had is like, you will never be in that person's shoes. All of their experiences accumulate to where they're at today and why they're in that room with you. So you might not have their experiences, or you might not have like those specific backgrounds, but they're in that room with you because they found out about you somehow. They believe in the work that you're doing, and that's why they are in front of you. So there's a reason why you're doing this work. It's very important for you to honor that. It is also very important for you when you get agitated, when you come up against a barrier in your work, to feel into it and really be open to learning more, because that is what's going to set you apart from the other people who aren't doing the trainings, or who are doing the same trainings that they've done day in and day out and feel like that's enough. So
Yeah.
But I love you ladies. I'm so grateful to, yes. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming on. It means so much to me. And for those of you watching, they are going to have, I have a couple of their bios, but I'm going to get them again because they always update with new trainings and new certifications. And you'll be able to find them. I'm also going to have their social media handles and different stuff like that, so that you'll be able to get in touch with them if you, you know, I'm already like, Liz, I want a training.
Same here.
Like my mom is like a water warrior, an environmentalist. Like I want her to learn from Kat. So, you know, like I think that it is a great opportunity, and this is why I love having different specialists in their fields come on to here, because I don't expect that every single person who sees me or hears my work is going to want just me. But I know that as I continue to bring on different people who are specialists in these groups, it's going to resonate with someone, and they might be the person who can help you. So thank you so much for coming on. All of you have an amazing day, and you all take care. Aloha.
Okay.
It was nice seeing everyone.